Hey everyone and welcome to Storytime. My name is Jake and today we are going to be looking at the subreddit r/maliciouscompliance, where people conform to the letter but not the spirit of a request. If you're new around here, please do hit subscribe down below so that you never miss out on another video. But for now, let's sit back, relax, and enjoy some malicious compliance. The policy is absolutely no overtime without 48 hours advance approval. Got it? I do now. This happened a long time ago. It was my first job after getting out of the military. The company I worked for was very cheap. They got all of their work by being the lowest bidder, and they did everything they could to pinch pennies. Most importantly, there was also a no overtime rule, which I quickly found out was strictly enforced. To be able to do any overtime, you had to get approval at least 48 hours in advance. If you got even 15 minutes of overtime, the smallest increment possible, they would make you take 15 minutes early the very next day to make sure they didn't have to pay you and overtime. And at the rates I was making in those days, 15 minutes equated to less than $2. In those few times I didn't get clocked out in time, my boss would give me a lecture the next day. He left at 4, I worked until 7. Then, he'd make me take 15 minutes early to erase the overtime. Each time, he would ask me why, and I would explain, which was always something understandable and justifiable. I'd still get a lecture about the overtime requiring 48 hours of approval prior to the overtime, and a warning that if I did it again, I just wouldn't get paid for it. Fine, I get it. You don't want me to get overtime. No problem. It also seemed to be lost on him that every time we had the conversation, it would take at least 30 minutes to talk about it. So, the combined waste was a whole hour to talk about 15 minutes of excess time. One of my tasks was to take down the temperature of this one freezer they had. The thing was a huge walk-in freezer that contained a few $1,000s worth of inventory. The temperature was supposed to be under 32 degrees, or lower than that, I don't remember. But one day, I saw the temperature was over 40, so I wrote it down and called the supervisor up front. He told me not to worry about it, he'd get the night crew to take a look at it, and that I should get out of there before I get overtime. The next day, I got a lecture from the boss about the 48-hour rule, and was told to not do it again. So, that evening, when it was close to the time for me to leave, I checked that freezer again, and its temperature is up in the 40s again. I write it down on the log and call up the maintenance team. No one answers. I look at the clock. It's time for me to start heading to the exit to clock out. I think about calling up that supervisor to tell him, but as far as I can tell, no one even looked at that freezer the night before. So I said, screw it. If I reported it, I was going to be late and my boss was going to lecture me again. So, okay. Here's your malicious compliance. I knew the potential damage, but I also knew I was going to get a lecture if I tried to do anything about it. So, have it your way. Don't want me to report it? Fine, I'm leaving for the night. The next morning, the boss calls me to his office. From there, I can see that the freezer is open and they have a work crew emptying out the contents onto carts, which they're taking to the dumpster. Apparently, everything, or most everything, was ruined. When I get in the boss's office, he looks angry. He's not the only one there though. There's also the safety inspector, which I thought was odd because ordinarily, if there was something like this, it would be the maintenance boss. But he was out that day. I would have preferred the maintenance boss. Talking to that guy was like talking to your grandpa. The safety inspector was a bit of a character, and as such, you never knew what he was going to say in an interview like this. While my boss is trying to point fingers at me for failing to notify anyone, the safety inspector acting as maintenance boss points out that clearly there's enough evidence of policy in place that the process is flawed and that he should take that as an out for him and me both. They end up having this huge investigation, a witch hunt, but in the end, they come down to the conclusion that I didn't do anything wrong and was just following orders, as I'd said. So, to save $2 in overtime, they let a few $1,000s worth of inventory go to waste. As far as I could tell, after I reported the problem the first time, no one said or did anything more about it, and even less the second time. Whatever was wrong with that freezer was going to take 2 months to fix, for whatever reason. So they had to rent a refrigerated tractor trailer, which I was told cost them $100 a day to lease. If that's true, the mishap ended up costing somewhere around $10,000. I don't know if the repairs and trailer rental could have been avoided, but the lost inventory definitely could have been avoided. Second, malicious compliance. With the first incident behind me, or so I thought, we had someone on the early shift who quit. They needed someone to move from the afternoon shift, 11 till 7, to the morning shift, 4 till 12. Guess who they picked? I was told it was because I was the most junior person, but that didn't make sense because they'd hired another person after me and she was still there. I felt like it was punishment, but at the same time, I kind of wanted to be on the morning shift, so I kept my mouth shut and took that shift as told. My popularity with the boss didn't improve any. For one thing, anytime I'd request a day off, he'd reject it. At first, it would be for reasons like, "Sorry, that's not enough notice." But I would sometimes tell him 3 or 4 months in advance, so they would always be refused. This also applied to holidays. Since we needed both shifts to work every single day, including all major holidays, not everyone could take holidays off. So I got stuck being on duty when it was a holiday. But I could bank my holiday and would be told that I could use that holiday later on, a day of my own choosing, which meant never because my boss would never approve them. When I got on the morning shift, we were short a man on the afternoon shift because I had gone to that morning shift. This was okay for a while. In typical corporate fashion, they didn't even post a job opening for a few weeks. So, after a while, the afternoon shift was getting pretty ragged from doing all their work with a man absent. Typically, what would always happen in the past was that the boss would ask someone from the early shift to pull a double and would work an extra 7 hours. This was pretty rare because of the no overtime rule. One day, the boss calls me into his office just before noon. He tells me, "I need you to pull a double today. The second shift could really use the extra help." "Okay," I said. As little as I made, I appreciate the overtime. But at the same time, this just made me feel used and abused, which kind of annoyed me. I couldn't take time off, not even on holidays. And as cheap as the company was, they were saving a ton of money by not hiring a third person for that shift, but would burn out the existing employees for a few extra bucks. Then, I thought about it a little more and said, "Wait, I've worked 8 hours already. If I work till 7, that will give me..." I counted it up on my fingers just for dramatic effect. 5, 6, 7. Yeah, 7 hours of overtime for the day. "I'm authorizing the overtime," my boss said. "Okay," I said, then turned to leave and stopped again. Wait, authorizing it as in my paycheck will reflect 7 additional hours at time and a half? Or authorizing it as in, when I get here tomorrow morning, I'll work an hour and you're going to send me home because I'm 7 hours ahead on my time card? "7 extra hours on your paycheck," he said. "At time and a half?" I asked. "Yes, goddammit," he said. "Okay," I said, then turned again, but then turned right back. "Hey, wait a minute, you almost had me there." "What are you talking about?" my boss asked. "That was pretty good," I said, wagging a finger at him. "I almost fell for it too." He looked at me like I was crazy, and maybe I was. "This is like some expert level Simon Says," I said. "What are you on about?" he asked me. "You almost got me," I said. "It's a trap." I looked at the wall where some of the notices were posted. Here it is. I pointed to a paper that had the no overtime rule on it. It even had my signature on it, along with the other employees. Right here, blah blah blah, no overtime, and 48-hour prior approval. And aha, here it is, absolutely no exceptions. Phew, you almost had me with that one. Could you imagine if I worked overtime? I wouldn't get paid because right now, here, today, this isn't 48 hours in advance of a few minutes from now. I smiled triumphantly at the boss and left his office and didn't do the overtime. I thought I was pretty slick. The next time it happened, my boss caught me in the hallway and said he needed me to work a double today. I nodded, then responded with, "Hey, wait a minute, do you mean today's today as in right now? Because you know I can't do that." I shrugged my shoulders. You know the policy. You know, policy. No exceptions. He looked at me like I had two heads and walked off. I pulled this a few times on him and I felt justified in doing so. I know I was pushing it, but damn, you can't say no exceptions, then claim an exception. I figure I could have been fired over not doing it, but at the same time, I figured I could also find another job without much difficulty. When I got moved to the morning shift, I had gotten a part-time job in the afternoons that paid enough to make it worth my time. Also, I'd already interviewed with a few places, and with the responses I was getting, I figured I wouldn't be out of work very long if I did get fired, whether it would have been legal to fire me or not. Working the morning shift had given me plenty of time to interview in the afternoons. So, because they were so whiny about getting 15 minutes of overtime and acting like it was all my fault, no exceptions period, I threw their words back at them and refused to do the overtime because has to be a 48-hour prior approval. In the long run, I like to think it hurt them more than it hurt me. Hey everyone, I hope you all had a really good day and that you enjoyed that video. If you want to check out some other videos, then click on screen right now or check out the playlist down below. If you enjoyed that video, then please do leave a like. And if you want to submit your own stories, then you can do so by joining the Discord in the top link in the description. But thank you so much for watching and I will see you very soon.